Well, let me do a little preamble here while we get the sound adjusted. Those of you who had a chance to read the book or are in the middle of reading it, you know that it's a remarkable piece of work, a remarkable accomplishment. And I can tell you, as a fellow journalist, I could only imagine the amount of effort that this took and how hard it was to do. We're going to talk a little bit about that, I hope. But what I really wanted to start with was when you told people you were writing a book, how did you tell them what you were doing? How did you talk about this? What compelled you to go do this story?
Good question. Can you hear me? Okay. It sounds normal up here, so I'm glad you can. Well, I promise I'll answer that question, but I just want to say what a gift it is to be here with you all tonight, to be speaking with Kevin. Mercy Care has a very important place, not only in my family's life, but Mercy Care was integral to the genesis of this book. So maybe by way of at least answering the part of the question about how I came to this project, I can tell you that in around 2018, my family and I had recently relocated from New York to Atlanta, and my wife Elaine is a nurse practitioner, and she had been working in community health first in Durham, North Carolina, then in New York, and then got a job with Mercy Care. And so she was working at Mercy Care for a couple of years, and we share a car, and every day I would pick her up from work and she would tell me about her day, and she started telling me about a trend that she was seeing where she would be talking to a patient and they would tell her how they were working at Walmart, or they were packing boxes at an Amazon warehouse, or they were driving for Uber and Lyft, or even working at daycares, working as home health aides. In one case, there was a patient who was helping but working on sets for movie productions. And when they were finishing their work, when they were finishing their shifts, they weren't going to an apartment. They were sleeping in the very cars they had just done a run to the airport in for Uber, or they were going to overcrowded apartments of others, or they were going to these extended stay hotels, living in just abysmal conditions in these extended stay hotels, or in a couple of cases, even sleeping on the street in a tent. And when she told me about that, I was stunned because, I don't know, maybe like many of you, I had a kind of intuitive assumption that work was an exit from homelessness. Work was an exit from this most severe form of deprivation. The idea that work could be an accompaniment to this form of deprivation, to homelessness, was really shocking to me. And I remember around that time, I had been working as a journalist. I had been reporting on different things around the world, often very bleak subjects, often involving economic injustice or inequality of some sort. And I had read books about homelessness. I had never seen the relationship between work and homelessness explicitly discussed, much less unpacked and investigated. And I remember around that time, after Elaine told me about what she was observing at Mercy Care, I sat down at an academic search engine and I typed in "working homeless." And I expected to just find this plethora of literature, but I was surprised to find virtually nothing. And when work was discussed, it was what was missing from homelessness. And as Peter Rossi, a sociologist, put it in his classic text, Down and Out in America from 1989, as he put it, those who are homeless in America are, quote, unconnected to the world of work. So that was very much kind of the prevailing narrative that I was encountering as I started diving into the literature. And that prompted me, that initial shock prompted me to first write a story for the New Republic magazine, following one family in Atlanta for about 7 months. This family had recently been displaced from Peoplestown, the Peoplestown neighborhood of Atlanta, when the Beacon, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Beacon, but the Beacon is like Prague Street Market or Ponce City Market. It had recently opened up, and her investor landlord decided it was the perfect time to sell. They moved to a home in Forest Park. That was quickly condemned, and by the time I met them, they had been homeless for about 4 months, notwithstanding Ms. Goodman, the mom's job as a full-time job as a home health aide. After I finished that story, I realized I had only scratched the surface, that there was so much more to understand. I just wondered, is this pervasive? Is this somehow unique to Atlanta? But I began reporting on homelessness and housing insecurity around the country, in Northern California and other places. And far from being specific to Atlanta, I found was just representative of what was happening in cities across the country where wages, the chasm between what people were making in their jobs and what it just cost to have a place to live was growing wider and wider.
So those of you who've read the book know this, but if you haven't, you follow 5 families in the book.
Yeah.
And all their stories are tough, and circumstances different. For purposes of tonight, pick one of those families and kind of describe what happened to them, how you met them, what kinds of terms, relationships let you be so inside their life.
Yes, I wish I could tell you about all 5 of the families, because each of their journeys, each of their stories is so kind of singular and is really intended in the book to illuminate a different aspect of the larger crisis of housing insecurity and homelessness. But I always find myself talking about Celeste. Celeste, her story in the book begins in this very dramatic and heartbreaking way. She's driving home from work one day from her warehouse job, and she's just picked up the kids. Her neighbor calls and says, your rental home is on fire. You better get back here. So she makes it back to East Point to Westover Drive, and by the time she gets there, her home is burned down. She later found out, it was discovered that an abusive ex, who she had recently taken a restraining order out on, was responsible for the fire, was later arrested for arson. But when I'm telling the story, I'm always at pains to say it wasn't the house fire that pushed Celeste and her children into homelessness. And even using the word pushed there is something that I've come to learn to do, because Celeste and her children did not fall into homelessness. They were pushed. And the reason I say pushed is because what happened next is Celeste, she thought her housing search would be relatively brief, that after the home burned down, she would get into another place relatively quickly. But as she went on Zillow and apartments.com and began going around the city looking for housing, she realized to her horror that the ground had kind of shifted under her feet in the time she had been renting. As some of you might be aware, I believe it was about a 5-year period, rents in the city had gone up about 65%. A number I cite in the book that I've later found out is much higher. I said in the book that around 65,000 affordable housing units had been lost in the period that she had been renting. Recent research shows it was actually closer to 200,000 in Metro Atlanta had been lost. And in that same period, Atlanta had undergone a much celebrated renaissance, a kind of transformation of its urban space. But what Celeste discovered, like many poor and working class Atlantans have discovered, is that this renaissance was exacting a toll on their ability to stay housed, not just to remain in the neighborhoods where they grew up, but really to find housing at all. And so Celeste, what she thought would be a quick housing search, turned into a protracted and really grueling housing search, and she started calling in favors from every friend, relative, coworker she had. Can we sleep in your garage? She and her 3 kids. Can we sleep on your couch? Can we sleep on your floor? But soon all of those
favors, were exhausted. She had no one else to call. She started sleeping in her Dodge Durango with the kids. Those nights were terrifying for Celeste because not only did she have to wake up and go to work the next morning and get the kids, bathed in the Walmart bathroom or the gas station bathroom, but she was so scared those nights in the car as she's running the air conditioner because it's hot out and she's wasting precious gas. She's terrified that there will be a knock on the window and a police officer will come and the police officer will call defects. And that fear was justified because in Georgia, like in many states in the US, roughly 20% of child removals are the direct result of what is officially categorized as inadequate housing. So Celeste was terrified that something could happen like that, and finally she found an apartment that was not quite affordable. It would eat up about 80% of her monthly income, but the leasing agent prayed with her, said, "You got this, apply, I think you're gonna get it." The leasing agent calls her back a few days later and says, "Why didn't you tell me about the eviction on your record?" And Celeste says, "What are you talking about? There is no eviction." Come to find out that after the house fire, she called her landlord, which was not just a mom and pop landlord, it was a private equity firm. And she called the landlord and said, "Can I move to a different home in your portfolio?" And they said, in order to terminate, and mind you, she had the police report, she had the fire marshal, all of that. There was clear evidence of the arson and so forth. But they said if you would like to, the customer service representative and God knows what city was telling her, if you want to terminate your lease, you will have to pay not only the current month's rent, because the fire had happened at the beginning of the month, but an additional month as well. You'll lose your security deposit, and that's to be considered for another home in our portfolio. And she hung up in disgust, Celeste. She thought that was the end of it, but they filed an eviction against her for non-payment of rent on a house that was literally uninhabitable. In Georgia, the sheriff is allowed to serve what's called a tack and mail eviction, where you don't have to be notified in person. So when Celeste actually drove to Westover Drive, and the house that still hadn't been repaired was sitting there and in the mailbox there was an eviction notice, the sheriff had written on the notice, "Served to fire destroyed property." And Celeste drove to the courthouse. By then it was too late. The judge had long ago handed down the default judgment, and Celeste, unbeknownst to her, a scarlet E had been placed on her rental history. This 3-digit number, a credit score, this 3-digit number that has come to determine whether millions of people in this country have access to something as fundamental as a place to live. Her credit score had been destroyed. She now belonged to what a journalist friend of mine refers to as the credit underclass in America, and realizing that she is now effectively barred from the formal housing market because no landlord will now rent to her, will now lease to her, she did what scores of other families and individuals are doing. She went to an extended stay hotel where there's no credit check and where all you have to do is pay your weekly rate. And I'll hopefully be able to speak a little bit more about the world of extended stay hotels, because here in Metro Atlanta, there are an estimated 30 to 43,000 families and individuals living in these hotels. And it's a huge phenomenon across the country. But Celeste went to a hotel called Efficiency Lodge, and at that hotel she began to pay more than double what she had just been paying for the rental home that had burned down. For this 2-bedroom rental home, she's now paying more than double that for a studio-sized room where water is leaking from the ceiling and there are cockroaches across the floor. And she fell at that point into what many people call the hotel trap.
So, when you first start talking about the idea that they didn't fall into homelessness, they were pushed, the stereotypes about what's going on here are something you just disintegrate in the book. So talk about, as you worked on it and you came to understand how most of us tend to understand homelessness versus what really goes on.
Yeah. Yes. Well, first of all, and I know I'm using this word a lot tonight, so bear with me, but I was shocked, stunned, astonished to discover as I was doing this reporting, that there's this entire world of homelessness that is out of sight, that exists out of sight, that is invisible. And the hotels are a big sort of node, as it were, in the ecosystem of this hidden homelessness, but it's also in parking lots, it's in families who are doubled up with others. I began to ask, like, well, why is it that these families, because each of the five families who I followed in this book, every year when the homeless count is conducted, it's called the point in time count, every year that it's conducted, and it's mandated by HUD, by the federal government, and scores of volunteers fan out across the country, counting everyone
We
who's...
probably have some people here who've done that, right? Have you done that, anyone? Okay.
I did this in 2020, I believe, as part of the reporting for this book. And what I was surprised to find is that all of the families I wrote about, and to put a number on it, I mean, this sort of jumping the gun a bit, but I found that those who are counted in that official count make up just a tiny sliver of the total homeless population. That census only considers homeless, only counts as homeless those who are visible on the street or who are staying in officially designated homeless shelters. Everyone else literally doesn't count. And there's so many directions to go, but just to give you a sense of the magnitude of what is missing from that official count. So every year when our newspaper headlines say homelessness is down 3% or homelessness is up 2%, what is missing, the magnitude of what is missing just here in Georgia alone, if you were to gather all of the families and individuals who are excluded from that official count just in Georgia, you could gather them at Truist Park where the Braves play. They would fill that stadium 3 times over, just those who are left out. And that is mirrored and replicated in nearly every state in the country. So, the tragic reality is that as bad as the official homeless numbers are, and the last 2 years nationally have seen the highest levels of homelessness on record, as high as the official numbers are, the reality on the ground is exponentially worse because all these people are being excluded. What I came to realize is that exclusion has fateful consequences, not just for our sense of the true scale and the true severity of the crisis, and understanding, to be sure, the true scale and true severity is important, because, and there's a line from James Baldwin I love that could almost be an epigraph for this book. He says, "Not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And so we as a country, we as a community, we do ourselves no favors by hiding the true reality, the true magnitude of homelessness in our midst. But it's not just the numbers, it's also that our very conception, our understanding of who is becoming homeless in this country and why has been distorted by narrowing the lens in this way. What we see on the street, the tents, are just the tip of the iceberg. And in many ways, what my book is trying to show is that there's this immense iceberg under the water's surface, and it's made up overwhelmingly of families with children, and overwhelmingly of men and women who are part of this nation's labor force, who are clocking in at jobs every day, who are working and working and working some more, and it simply is not enough to secure this most basic human necessity. But when you narrow the lens, we can begin to tell ourselves this comforting story about how homelessness only afflicts a certain type of person for a particular set of reasons. We can tell ourselves homelessness is caused by mental illness or addiction or laziness. But I think it's important to say that what unites everyone experiencing homelessness in this country, whether they're on the street or they're in a shelter or they're in these hotels or they're in their car, what unites all of those experiences, and this is my own argument for what causes homelessness, it's pretty profound, it's not having a home. It's not having access to housing that people can afford. And that is the variable. That is the reason why in some of the poorest areas of the country, you don't have skyrocketing homelessness. Where is homelessness soaring? It's soaring in places where, again, there is this growing gap between what people are earning in their incomes or what they're getting in their disability checks or their other forms of assistance and what it costs to remain housed. That is what causes homelessness. And I know I'm going on, but lest we not get to this point tonight, I really want to emphasize one thing. Because a misreading of this book is, okay, Brian, thank you so much for giving us this homeless population that we can have sympathy for. These are working folks. These are people who are trying to take care of their children. I can have sympathy for them, and I can continue to look down on those men and women who I see on the street. Those aren't the people you're talking about. You're talking about different folks. And what is so important to say about this is that homelessness is not a fixed condition. It is not a terminal state. Homelessness is a spectrum of insecurity. And you can be in a hotel today, you can be in your car tomorrow because you weren't able to pay your weekly rate at that hotel because there was a missed paycheck from sickness or lapsed childcare or an unexpected family emergency, and you're out of that hotel room, and now you're in your car, but your car just got towed, and now you're sleeping in the parking lot of that hotel, and a year from now you're in a tent, and your children have been taken away, and all you see on the street is a single man or a single woman, and you don't know where their children are, you don't see their family. And I just want to say that homelessness is a spectrum, it's a continuum of insecurity, and the same compassion that we might feel inclined to feel, as I'm so grateful people are feeling for these families I'm writing about. One of the families in the book, Michelle and her children, they experience that very thing where when we meet her, she's wearing a Santa hat and making her kids Christmas Eve dinner, and they're building a gingerbread house at the end of the chapter, and by the time the book comes to a close, she is sleeping in a MARTA station, Michelle. She is in the throes of alcoholism. And the reason it was important to report this book over many years was to show how utterly preventable that state was in the MARTA station. And it's the same person. She is the working homeless. At that point, she was just the working homeless that is no longer working because so many interventions were missing that could have prevented her from falling into that condition.
Brian promised to indulge me as a fellow journalist to do a little bit about the process he used, and I'm hoping that'll be interesting to you. But more importantly, we are going to take questions from the audience. We're going to allow some time for that here at the end, right, Catherine? So if I'm glossing over something you want to know more about, start thinking about your questions. But back to the people. So these 5 families, and you can just talk about one if it's easier, but how did you meet these people?
Yes.
How did you get them?
Yes.
How did you...
Yes.
The access that you have, just as a journalist reading the book, the moments you're witnessing, how did you do that? And plus, I think throw in some of the lighter moments, because these are real people with funny things that happen and amazingly persistent things they do. But how did you convince them to let you be right in the middle of their lives?
Yeah. I have often been asked, how did I go about choosing the families who would be in this book? And it's always a funny question to me because in retrospect, it is, and I'm not using this lightly, it is truly miraculous that they allowed me into their lives, into their worlds in the way that I was asking to be let in. And one thing I'll say about this subject is that in Atlanta, as in any number of other cities, there is no shortage of people who are experiencing this. My basic criteria was just people who are working and people who don't have stable housing. And when I was following Kokethia Goodman and her children for the magazine story, either one of my great virtues or great vices as a journalist is I just spend way, way, way too much time on the story. And
as an editor, I have questions like that. We'll talk about it later.
So even after I had filed the story to my editor at the magazine, I continued to go with Ms. Goodman and her children to the food pantry. I continued to go with them to church, to meetings with caseworkers. And in the course of doing that, I just kept meeting more and more families like them. And I was also meeting caseworkers, and I was meeting church volunteers, and I was meeting, defects where you name it. And so when it came time to write the book, or to begin reporting the book, when I realized, okay, I'm going to expand this article into a book, I already had many people to call on. And so some of the families I met just in that process. To give one example, Michelle, who I was just describing, who, when the book opened, she, again, is making Christmas Eve dinner for her kids. The way I met Michelle was after I had finished reporting the New Republic story, I was put in touch with a woman named Phyllis who ran the food pantry at a church called the Beloved Community in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh neighborhood. And I spent time at that church, and Phyllis, she called me one Friday night. She said, I met a family. I put them at this hotel, this extended stay hotel, but my car broke down and I can't bring them food. I promised I would bring them food. Would you be able to help and bring them some food? And I said, of course. So I went to Efficiency Lodge, which is the extended stay hotel that Celeste ended up at, who I was describing in that first story, and the hotel where I would spend the bulk of my reporting and sort of embed myself there.
And that hotel's on Candler Road.
It's on Candler Road.
Anyone here can go over there if you really want to see it. I mean, it's a real place. It's not made up, and it's not a fictional book.
You leave downtown Decatur, you go down Candler Street, you pass Agnes Scott on your right, you continue down Candler, you cross over Memorial, and in the book I describe that as almost like crossing an invisible threshold. The green canopy, the tree canopy disappears. Now the landscape is dotted with dialysis clinics and pawn shops and payday lenders, and lined with extended stay hotels. So I had been, as a resident of Atlanta, I had been driving by these hotels all the time. I had no idea that these hotels were, in effect, extremely profitable homeless shelters. That's what I've now come to see them as. Extremely profitable homeless shelters, except most homeless shelters have to abide by certain conditions. Whereas these hotels are, overwhelmingly slum conditions. Not unlike the apartment complexes depicted in the AJC series that hopefully many of you read, called Dangerous Dwellings, where...
I made him plug the newspaper, I'm sorry.
that was an easy plug, because, yeah. So I had been driving by these hotels all the time, but tonight, this Friday night, was the first time I went to Little Caesars, I picked up a bunch of pizzas on Candler Road, and then I went to Efficiency Lodge and met Michelle. She came down from her room, she said, Mr. Goldstone, don't get out of your car, it's a little wild here on a Friday night. And I said, okay, and she gratefully took the pizzas, and she said, by the way, you wouldn't happen to have any personal item, and would you be able to perhaps bring, some toiletries? And I said, absolutely, I'll come tomorrow. So I went the next day, and I heard her story, and I met the manager at the hotel, a total character, a woman named Lisa. And Lisa, she said, you're a journalist, you should come write about this place, because, and she's actually the first one to use that term, home. She said, you think this hotel, this is a homeless shelter. These people, if this hotel didn't exist, these people would be on the street. And I said, well, do you mind if I come and just spend time here? I can be with you in your office and just meet people. She said, come anytime you want. She was surprised anyone wanted to be there. And
how many total hours would you say you spent there?
Oh, once I met some of the other families, I couldn't be in several places at once, obviously, but I spent about a year there. Definitely every week I was there. Often I would just be there for I would just tell my wife and kids, I'm going to work, and I would leave at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would come back at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night.
I'm just trying to prove how unglamorous journalism can be.
Yeah. Before I became a journalist, I have a PhD in cultural anthropology, and I really approached this reporting more as I would an ethnography, just immersing myself as much as humanly possible in the day-to-day lives of those I was writing about.
Now, you don't use the real names of people in the book. Talk about the rules of engagement you established with the families and how you did that, and what your mindset was as you did that.
Yeah, it was very important to me to do this. This is going to sound self-aggrandizing, but to do this with integrity, to both depict the brutal realities of what they were experiencing, while also making it clear up front that this is, and maybe it would be different if I was working with a newspaper or a magazine, but I had
about a year working on something if you've been working for me. Well, go ahead.
I said to them, look, I'm going to be around as much as you will allow me to be around. And indeed, going with them to Thanksgiving dinners, going with them to therapy, really, really intimate stuff. And I said, but nothing is set in stone. If I witness something and you don't want this written about, or you tell me something and a few weeks later you say, I do not want this written about, I don't want this in the book, please tell me this is not set in stone.
Did that happen at all?
It did not happen a single time.
It's not unusual when you talk that way with people and you're that straightforward with them, right? They're willing to share their story.
They were willing, and I would check in with them because they forgot that I was a journalist. They saw me as a friend. They saw me as a therapist. They saw me as the guy who they can call at 1 a.m. and vent about what it was like to go to clock in at work that day at KFC and discover they had been terminated when they went to use their thumbprint to clock in because the pandemic struck, and that's how they found out they were fired. To vent about that. I was the guy, I was the support system, and part of why I think they allowed me in the way they did is because of how little support they had, because of how few voices they had in their life who could just offer a reassuring word. And so that's how they saw me, and I would check in and say, just a reminder, this is what I'm here for. Is there anything you've told me, And at the end of the whole process, when the book was done, I sat down with each of them individually and went through the entire part of the book that involved them and said, and that was crushing. There is some stuff in here that is crushing. It's crushing for them because they lived it, because there are decisions that people make, that people made in the book, that there are no words for how much they regret it. These families are their own harshest critics. The shame that they have internalized, often the shame that has been directed at them, the judgment that has been directed at them, that we as a society direct at those who are struggling. They have internalized that, but at the end of the process, I went through the whole book with them, the parts that concern them, and there were a lot of tears, but I said, is there anything that you want me to change or take out? And to their credit, each of them said, no, this is the reality. And, and often as journalists or researchers or people who are trying to do good in the world, even those with nonprofits, we sometimes, when we talk about those who are in these situations, we turn them into like angelic figures. We turn them into people who don't have decisions that they regret, who haven't made bad choices, who are sort of unblemished. And we think we need to do that because certain audiences won't engage if you don't present them in that way. But I'm really convinced that it is just as dehumanizing to deprive people of their flaws as it is to simply pathologize them and make them into caricatures that we can attack. It's just as dehumanizing, and I just have so much admiration for Michelle, Celeste, Kara, Maurice, Natalia, and Brits and their children, their willingness to put it out there for others to understand and others to see what it's really like.
So one more process question. What is your favorite part of the book, or the thing you're most proud of in the book?
There's a moment toward the end of the book, and I hesitate to say this, because if you haven't read it, it's meant to come as a big moment. So if you haven't read it and you end up reading the book, just forget you heard me say this. But toward the end of the book, Michelle, who I described, she was at the MARTA station. Not long after that time when she was sleeping there, she asked if we could meet at a Chick-fil-A on Memorial Drive, and we met at Chick-fil-A, and the woman sitting across from me was not someone I recognized anymore. Her face was battered. Her boyfriend was threatening to kill her. She hadn't showered or bathed in over a month. She reeked of alcohol, and I was begging her to please leave. This is not to leave this man. And she, at the end of that couple-hour conversation, she said, I'm not ready yet, I'm not ready to leave. And just a few days later, some really bad stuff happened, and finally she called me. She was at a laundromat on Memorial, and she said, she called me at like 6 o'clock in the morning. She said, can you come here? And by the time I arrived, she was FaceTiming with her children. She had borrowed a phone from a woman who worked at the laundromat. She was FaceTiming with her children, and I was able to witness this moment as depicted in the book. I was able to witness her. I've never talked about this moment publicly, so it's a very, I don't know, maybe it won't even make sense why but being there, knowing the estrangement that she now had with her children and how much she loved her children, how much they loved her, but it had been, I think, months since they had even spoken. They thought she was dead, and watching them on FaceTime together, and her telling them, I've decided I'm getting out of this. I'm getting out of this I'm leaving him, and I'm going away. It turned out she was going away to a place in rural Georgia. I've agreed not to share certain details, but where she would get the help she needed to both break the connection with this man and also to deal with the trauma and the addiction that she was now dealing with. But that moment in the laundromat and being able to witness that and then convey that in writing, and to feel like, yes, that captured what it was like to be there, that was the moment, I think. It was the happiest moment for me in the reporting process. Yeah, it was. There were moments like this. There were lesser versions maybe of this, but there were so many moments of grace, of just in the midst of some of the worst circumstances you can imagine, unbelievable beauty, a joke being made, at a moment where you're like, how do you have a sense of humor still? And it was mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing how strong humans can be, and how and to see people showing up for their friends and neighbors, people who have the least to spare, giving the most. People, caseworkers, a woman named Pink in the book, who is like a ray of sunshine when she arrives, who has a sort of clothing closet out of her car, which everyone thinks she's living out of her car because it's just packed with clothes. And she, maybe some of you know Pink. She's done a lot of work here in the unhoused community in Atlanta. But to see her showing up with a box of, driving 30 minutes to bring a box of tampons or to bail someone out of jail. I mean, just unbelievable acts of generosity. And so
so the reporting was really filled with as many moments that were surprising in their grace as they were devastating in their pain. Yeah.
Catherine, are we out of time? I think we are, right? Okay. So we're going to take questions from you all, but I've been told we're going to prime the pump a little bit with some people who've got some things to say. And I think we're going to start with Jeff Smith. I think, is it Shayna? Okay.
I work with Archie, the Atlanta Regional Collaborative for Health Improvement, and just kind of thank you so much. I think just to share a moment of hope from this is one of the things that we get to see is working with organizations that have come together, working with people who are facing eviction, who have experienced eviction and are coming together. And so I think for us, the hope is seeing 19 and counting growing organizations that are saying, we're going to stick with it, even if our funding is coming down, even if the need is going up, just seeing all these organizations kind of putting aside their turf and saying, we're going to do it together. So I wanted to share that moment of hope.
Perfect.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Raphael Holloway. I serve as the CEO of Gateway Center. We actually connected some years ago back in 2019 with the New Republic article.
I remember that. Yes.
So
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for this work that you've shared with us and sharing the experience, because I think oftentimes what you clearly stated was that there's a misconception of the who. And sometimes we get caught up in wanting to identify who is homeless versus what are we doing about it, right? Because that's really the real call to action, is that should anyone be unhoused, what's the minimum level of housing that we want made available for anybody? And if we start addressing that, then we can start to see some improvements. So with that, I'm very excited to be collaborating with Catherine and others in the room and the work that we're doing. Is it enough? No. But we are seeing some success working with our mayor's office and others to look at the types of homes that we build so that we can increase the type of affordable units that are available. But it's going to take everyone being involved. It's not just a social service provider issue to deal with. It's a community issue. And as a community, Atlanta has shown success in the past, and I think we will continue to do that if we choose to work together. But thank you for this.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Shona Shaw. I'm with In Town Cares, the Director of Homeless Services. Those guys were very, very fancy. Oh, I do. Yes, I do talk very fast. I'm not usually a public speaker. I'm actually here on behalf of my ED, so he sent me in the room. Actually, Raphael kind of talked about what I was going to talk about, but I wanted to mention something that you said about you being their support, because they don't have a lot of support. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize, is being that person that is there for them in the times that they need it most is a game changer. So I know a lot of our organizations have case managers. I know Mercy Care's got a team, Gateway, everyone's got a team that we work together, but our biggest thing is just building trust with the homeless community and the unhoused people, and making sure that they have someone, whether it be, again, with In Town Cares or with Mercy Care or whatever, that they can rely on to help them on their journey back to being housed. So that's that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brian, thank you very much for your presentation, but more importantly for what you do. I'm struck by how close you got to these families. How did you manage the urge not to fix the problem?
Yes, very big and difficult question. I've realized that in answering that question, the couple of times it's come up since the book came out, that it is appropriate for me to falter in answering it, because I don't trust any journalist or anyone who spends time with people who are struggling in this way, for whom this question does not keep them up at night, like where this isn't a very, very hard question to answer. And I did establish up front, with the families when I met them, I said, look, I am here to document and observe as much as I can of what it's like to be in your shoes. And I try to, all of them really got, in their own way, the importance of people seeing what it's like. Because
I mean, it's one thing to just be experiencing this deprivation. It's another thing to feel completely unacknowledged and unrecognized and just invisible, just really invisible, or invisible at best, judged and condemned at worst. And so for them, there was this initial impetus. Yes, Brian is here to show people what it's like. And so I said, in doing that, I can't be manipulating the very circumstances that I'm here to document. I can't be paying your hotel rent every week. I can't be intervening in these really big ways, because then I wouldn't be doing my job anymore. And they got that, and I'm not saying there weren't times where that was challenged, but I think that the hardest moments had to do less with money than it did with knowledge. As I did this work over several years, I became a kind of expert in how the homeless services world operates and where you have to go to get help. And I even had a lot of connections with caseworkers and sometimes they offered to kind of allow families to skip the queue and to, let me prioritize. And so there were a lot of situations where I was just trying to navigate that. And so I think by and large, there's nothing, I can say this, there's nothing in the book, nothing recounted in the book where I had a hand in the circumstances depicted. Well, I'll just say that where I had a hand, where, of course, my very presence, it would be ridiculous to think that my very presence wasn't altering things in some way. But you asked about fixing it, and fixing it was a temptation. It was definitely a temptation. There was one moment where, if Kevin was going to ask me he asked me about the happiest moment, the most difficult, the most wrenching moment for me in the whole reporting process, and I won't get into the whole story, but it involved Kara, one of the parents in the book, going to what she thinks is going to be a house that she's going to be able to rent in Marietta, near Lassiter High School. She has just a few days left before her rapid rehousing assistance through Nicholas House is going to expire. So she has to find someone willing to rent to her to accept. And she goes to this house, and I had a dash cam in the car. I'd gotten her a dash cam because she also delivered for DoorDash. And her kids would be in the car. She didn't have childcare, so her kids were in the car. She was delivering DoorDash, and when I couldn't be with them physically, I would have this dash cam footage to kind of recreate what it was like. And so I had the dash cam in there, and I was on the speakerphone following them. And when we got to the house, I recorded it on my phone. I still have the video on my phone because I thought I was documenting a happy ending to their story. And we go into the house, and she's crying, and oh my gosh, this house is gorgeous, and I can actually afford it. And the landlord said he'll accept this subsidy from Nicholas House. And as we continued, I thought, this is not legit. This is not right. I knew it was a scam. I didn't have proof, but I knew it was a scam. And I was thinking in that moment, as Kara is being told by this guy, if you don't send a deposit today, which would for her mean emptying out her checking account, I'm going to rent it to someone else, you're going to lose it. And I knew Kara hadn't slept at that point for, 4 or 5 nights in a row. She had just been up. The stress, the anxiety. I knew that if she emptied her checking account, she would lose it. Like, she would be hospitalized. She would have some sort of break. And I was thinking in that moment, as a journalist, what do I do? Do I grab the phone from her and smash it on the ground? Because as I was saying to her, Kara, I don't think this is real. Tell him to hold on. She didn't want to hear it. She couldn't allow herself to believe that this wasn't real. And so what is my job? So we're not even talking about fixing it in a grand sense. We're just fixing that moment. And I didn't know what to, so I didn't smash her phone. Maybe I should have. And I can tell you that the chapter in the book where I describe that ends exactly how my time with Kara ended that day, which is not knowing whether she would send the money. She told the guy, I have to think about it, I'll let you know in a couple hours. And when we left, I went to my parents' house. My parents live in Roswell, and I cried and I was shaking. Because I just didn't know. So that was a moment. There were moments like that, and I struggled. In retrospect, I don't think trying to fix it would have been the right thing because people need to see the reality. I did, once the reporting ended and the writing process began, and with my editor, we realized everything that is going to be in the book is already there. I gave myself more freedom to intervene. I finally gave myself more freedom to pay the car note for that month, or to intervene in more meaningful ways financially, but also in other ways as well. And just to put cap on this whole conversation, I saw how my arrogance that, if I only decide whether to intervene or not, that will be the decisive fact. Even me deciding I am going to throw off my inhibitions and that didn't change much. Their credit scores still remained the same. They still couldn't get jobs that paid a living wage. They still couldn't pay the rent at apartment complexes whose rent was going up and up and up despite the conditions getting worse and worse and worse. I couldn't change those things.
I read the article last year from the New Republic. February 18, 2016, when I'm about to experience homeless and knee-deep in my addiction, there was something in me that said, do I want to continue to sleep in this 89 Lincoln Town car, or do I want to go to this shelter and get in treatment? I can't describe that inner strength, things we don't see. With your story and the people you talked to, what did that look like when they was able to finally pull themselves up by the bootstrap? And list some other barriers that they had to overcome.
Really, the only person in the book who that applied to was Michelle, who I was describing a moment, and I wish she could be sitting here. I'm tempted to just get her on the phone so she can tell you what it was like for her to get to that moment. I think for her, it was just realizing that she probably wouldn't live another day. The man who she was with. I hate to bring this into the room with us tonight, but it turned out, as I mentioned in the book, that I think it was about 6 months after she left this man, he was arrested for murdering his new girlfriend in Alabama, and he's now serving a prison sentence. So for her, it really was it felt to her like a life and death situation. I have to say, with the other families in the book, they were already doing what they're supposed to do. In America, there's this kind of implicit contract that we have as a society where we've said, if you work, if you just clock enough hours, right? You may not be able to be rich, you may not be able to buy a mansion, but you'll at least be able to take care of your most basic material needs. Each of the families in the book, even Michelle, you have to read about what led her to get to the point where she was self-medicating with alcohol, and where she had so gotten to the point of despair where embracing this kind of abusive relationship no longer felt faithful because of what she had already lost. That was so preventable. But each of the families who I followed, they were already doing what they're supposed to, working not just one job, but 2 jobs, 3 jobs sometimes. And, when we use the word working homeless, what I've realized is that we have to attend very carefully, not just to the homeless side of that equation, but to the working side too. Because something is profoundly broken in the working side of that. It's not just the low wages. It's not just that if people finally pull themselves up and say, all right, I'm gonna go get a job, that the jobs they're likely to get won't pay nearly enough to afford housing. And just so you know, this isn't just an Atlanta issue. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition has documented that right now in America, there is not a single state, city, or metro area where someone working full-time at the local minimum wage, which is higher than the federal minimum wage in many cases, like in Boston or California, where that full-time minimum wage worker can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And there's only 7 counties in the entire country where a full-time minimum wage worker earning the local minimum wage can afford a 1-bedroom apartment. 7 counties. I'm not sure what counties they are. But this is not just an Atlanta problem. The title of this book, There Is No Place for Us, that is as much a Nashville title, a Charlotte title, a Chicago title, Philadelphia, New York, San Francisco, LA. It is an American title. And part of why There Is No Place for Us has become such a defining condition for so many is that it's not just the low wages, it's that the nature of work itself has changed, becoming ever more insecure, volatile, not knowing how many hours am I going to be getting from one week to the next. One person in the book, Cass, she's cleaning the floors at the Atlanta airport overnight, and her employer is not the airport, but a third-party contractor who gives her 29 hours a week because at 30 she would be eligible for benefits, like sick leave or health insurance. Celeste, who I talked about, whose house burned down, she's later diagnosed with ovarian and breast cancer in the book. And she's having to decide, do I go to my warehouse job or do I go to my chemo appointment? Because if I go to my chemo appointment, I don't get paid because I don't have sick leave at that warehouse job. So that is the position that we put millions, there are 52 million approximately workers right now in this country earning less than $15 an hour. And whole industries have become gigified, which means that you don't have benefits like health insurance. So we have asked people to work, and we have not given them the opportunity to have the life that we have said you will have if you do work. And so that is in many ways what this book is trying to display.
Kevin, I wonder if we could give our board member Chioki the privilege of the last question. Is that
Sure
okay?
thing. Yes, absolutely.
And Kevin, I hope it's a question. First, let's go. Stop. Thank you. Because this thing about unintended consequences and collateral damages, absolutely loath to hear that when it involves humanity. And real simple, I'm honestly a little awed because I don't know how I missed you. You've been in so many places, so what I like to say is I've got a real living history around Atlanta. So when you talk about Pink or Chelsea Gardens especially, Pittsburgh on the south side, those are all places that have touched my life. But the greatest place that's touched my life is amongst the Sisters of Mercy and all Mercy Care staff. What I want to emphasize is you have identified for me something that I often say, being unsheltered, being homeless, being without in Atlanta, Georgia, is almost as American as apple pie because of some of the decisions that we've made. I think what we need going forward is to do what you actually did because I know that urge to want to fix it. But I've been warned on so many occasions how even Superman has kryptonite. But the level of accountability that each family you wrote about, and regardless of what they basically were going through, they never ceased to stop trying or to take some form of responsibility and be accountable.
Yeah.
So that was the most beautiful thing about the stories that you shared with us. I can only imagine what was left on the editing room floor in those places because you'll still be talking and interviewing families.
Yeah.
So just thank you for shining the light. And this is a great opportunity for everybody, all of us, sort of look out and look around us because nobody can ever tell Chioki that enough housing hadn't been built and created.
Yeah.
It's just that the model that we use or pushing, forcing
Yes.
human beings to the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is an opportunity the streets to meet the streets.
Yeah, yeah.
So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone back to Catherine. And just because I know the phones are ringing now, probably in her office and Raphael's and this young lady right here, because this is a continuous, ongoing, non-stop situation.
Yeah. If I could just respond to that really quickly, I just because I know we're probably running out of time, and I want to just say two things before we close. I just want to, in response, I want to say homelessness is a policy choice, and that is good news, because if policy choices got us into this, they can get us out of it, right? This is not an eternal condition. There is nothing inevitable or inescapable or intractable about the situations that we've been talking about. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is just what a gift, again, it is to be with Mercy Care, because, and Joy, who's here with street medicine, I went out with Joy in street medicine early on when I was starting to just learn about homelessness in Atlanta and beyond. And when I say that those who are giving the most, not just of their time and their resources, but of their souls, they're showing up completely, 100%. When I say that, and that those are also often the same organizations and people who have the least to spare, Mercy Care is Mercy Care, and that's really when people have asked me during the book tour, and where are you drawing hope from? Where are you drawing inspiration? It really is the fact that whatever's happening at the federal level, whatever's happening in Washington right now, and there is some pretty scary stuff happening where these issues are concerned. We at the local, in our community, people are showing up for their neighbors, and that transcends partisan lines. So I really just wanted to leave. I would have been remiss not to say that. So I just wanted to convey that.
So I'm going to get Brian to sign my book, and I think Catherine could explain what the others can do. I would get your book signed because you spent the evening here with someone who's going to be probably one of our great authors and commentators on important issues in our country, and this is just starting, so you can say you knew him when.